on the edge of Pine Willow Town, where winter pressed itself against every wooden door and the December winds cried through the empty fields. Young widow Clara Whitmore stood in her dim little kitchen, staring at the bare shelves that offered nothing but a few crackers, a jar of salt, and an old kettle that hissed with nothing more than hopeful steam, her heart tightening as she glanced at the small faces of her children, 8-year-old Hannah clutching her patched shawl and 6-year-old Jamie rubbing his cold hands together, wondering how she would tell them that this Christmas their table would hold no feast, no roast, no pie, not even the simplest bread, because work had been scarce and the last of her savings had gone to coal to keep the freezing wind from swallowing them whole. And though she whispered prayers in the quiet nights, she felt the weight of loneliness press hard on her chest, especially since her husband Thomas had died 2 winters ago, leaving her with nothing but memories of his warm laugh, his strong shoulders, and the way he always said, Clara, Christmas isn't about what's on the table, it's about who sits around it. Words that pierced her now, because those who sat with her were hungry, frightened, and depending on her for miracles she no longer knew how to give. Yet still she kept her chin up in front of them, brushing away their tangled hair and promising, "Mama will figure something out," even though she had no idea what she would do. But life has a way of sending hope through the most unexpected doorways, and sometimes it arrives in the form of a neighbor you barely know, a man who keeps to himself, a rancher with a quiet nature and a heart bigger than the land he works, Elias. Rowan, who lived 3 houses down, a man the town whispered about because he rarely spoke, carried his grief in silence, and tended to his animals as though they were the only family he had left. And though Clara had seen him a handful of times, at the well, at the post office, once when he tipped his hat shyly as she passed, she never imagined that this Christmas Eve morning, when snowflakes drifted like sleepy feathers from the dull grey sky, he would be the one, walking up her creaking porch, steps with something wrapped in burlap, under one arm and a nervous, almost hesitant knock. Clara froze at the sound, unsure whether she should answer, thinking perhaps it was the landlord asking again for rent she didn't have, or Mrs. Alden from church with pity in her eyes. But when she finally opened the door, breath misting in the cold air, and saw Elias standing there, his hat dusted with snow and his blue eyes soft with concern, she felt an unfamiliar warmth stir inside her. And before she could speak, he cleared his throat and said, "Morning, Miss Whitmore. I noticed your chimney hasn't been smoking much. Thought maybe you could use a little something." Then lifted the burlap-wrapped parcel and placed it gently in her arms. The weight of it more than she expected, far more, and when she peeked inside and saw potatoes, carrots, a small sack of flour, and a piece of venison already cleaned and ready for cooking, her breath caught and tears stung her eyes in a way she tried desperately to hide, because the kindness was too sudden, too generous, and too overwhelming. And Elias, awkward and humble, shifted his boots as though unsure whether he had done the right thing, as though he might turn around and apologize for offering help. But before he could speak again, Jamie ran to the door, squealing with excitement at the sight of the food, and Hannah tugged on Clara's skirt, whispering, "Mama, we can have Christmas dinner." And for the first time in weeks, Clara felt her heart swell with something other than fear, realizing that this man, this quiet neighbor, might have just saved not only their Christmas, but something far more fragile, her hope. She invited him inside, insisting he warm his hands by the stove. And though he hesitated, he stepped in, brushing snow from his coat, glancing around the small, worn home with gentle eyes that held no judgment, only understanding, only compassion born from his own hidden sorrows. And as Clara prepared the vegetables, the children chattering excitedly around the table, she found herself glancing at Elias again and again, noticing the way he smiled softly at Jamie's silly stories, how he ruffled Hannah's hair with surprising tenderness, and how, for the first time since Thomas died, the house felt just a little less empty, a little more alive, a little more like Christmas might be something she could believe in again. And as the hours slipped by, the small kitchen filled with the aroma of simmering stew, the bubbling pot seeming almost magical to the children who hovered nearby like eager little birds, and Clara kept catching Elias watching them with a softness in his expression that suggested he hadn't heard laughter like theirs in a long time, which made her wonder quietly, curiously, what loneliness he carried behind those steady eyes, and why a man as strong and capable as him spent so many holidays alone. But she didn't ask, sensing that some stories reveal themselves only when they're ready. So instead she simply thanked him again, and he brushed her gratitude aside with a humble shake of his head, saying, "A full table is meant to be shared," words that struck her deeply because they echoed Thomas's old saying in an almost uncanny way, making her heart ache and warm at the same time. And when the stew was finally ready, the children insisted Elias stay, tugging at his sleeves until he surrendered with a shy, almost embarrassed smile. And Clara set the table with their handful of mismatched bowls, filling each one until steam curled like little prayers of hope rising into the air. And they bowed their heads, Hannah leading the grace with a sweet, shaky voice, thanking God for the meal, for their mother, for warmth, and in a final whisper that made Clara blink back tears, Hannah added, "And thank you for Mr. Elias for saving Christmas." And when Clara lifted her gaze, she saw Elias quickly nudge a hand across his eyes as though brushing away dust, his jaw tightening in a way that told her the moment meant more to him than he could ever put into words. And as they ate, the house filled with simple joy, spoon clinks, giggles, Jamie swinging his legs and slurping too loudly, Clara laughing softly for the first time in months, and Elias, who rarely spoke, sharing small stories about ranch life, the children hanging on to every word as though he were a hero from a frontier tale. And by the time the bowls were empty and the children began crafting little paper snowflakes from old newspaper scraps, that fragile warmth Clara felt earlier had grown into something stronger, something dangerous and hopeful all at once. Because when she glanced at Elias sitting near the hearth, firelight brushing gold across his worn features, she felt a pull she hadn't felt for anyone since Thomas, a gentle but undeniable awareness of the man before her. Yet she scolded herself silently, reminding her lonely heart that kindness didn't mean interest, and a shared meal didn't mean a future. But as the night grew colder and snow thickened against the windows, Elias stood to leave, thanking her for the company, as though he hadn't been the one to save her family from despair, and with a faint smile he added, "If you need anything else, even firewood or help around the house, you only need to knock." And though Clara nodded politely, inside she felt a warmth bloom at the thought that she wouldn't have to face the winter alone. After he stepped outside and disappeared into the gentle storm, Clara closed the door and leaned against it, whispering a quiet, emotional breath, realizing that Christmas had been transformed in a matter of hours, not because of the food, but because someone cared enough to notice her struggle. And as her children danced around the small tree they'd made from pine branches, Clara whispered a promise to herself that tomorrow, Christmas Day, she would find a way to repay Elias's kindness, not with gifts she couldn't afford, but with gratitude, warmth, and the open-hearted generosity Thomas once taught her, unaware that fate had already begun binding their stories together in ways she couldn't yet imagine, weaving a path toward something deeper, something healing, something that might just turn a quiet, grieving neighbor into something far more precious than a visitor, perhaps even family. Happy Christmas. Subscribe our YouTube channel, Cowboy Legends Story,